Hello, BookTube. We are in the fourth and final week of New Worlds November 2022. That is a BookTube event created by the Bookish Bryants. They assembled a whole group of great co-hosts, I'm one of them, designed to celebrate short science fiction. Short novels, 220 pages or fewer, and especially short stories and novellas. And we have constructed themes for the 4 weeks and scavenger hunts of a whole bunch of separate items that you could find within the themes. And I have been a bad host. Not only have I not made a 30-minute video every day, but I have largely disregarded the themes and haven't gone on any scavenger hunts. The theme for this final week is robots and AI, which is a fascinating subject, and I have been doing a large amount of reading on it in 2023, but all longer works than 220 pages and all nonfiction. And that sort of impinges on one of the problems that I've been having with New Worlds November, although it's not New Worlds November's fault. It's been one of the problems I've been having with science fiction, just in general, in 2023. And I don't know why it's suddenly been more of a problem for me this year than it has been in other years. I blame New Worlds November. I specifically blame the Bookish Bryants. The problem is prolepsis. And I ordinarily get to just put that way in the back of my mind when I'm reading science fiction. But for 1 week during New Worlds November this year, I kicked off with a little pulpy paperback that I read of short stories by science fiction authors about or set on the planet Venus. But the stories were all written before the space probes by the Soviet Union and the United States that showed what Venus is like. We didn't know until then. We had no idea. Since we knew that it was a permanently cloudy planet and that it was close to the sun, we assumed that it would be hot. And most people, from Edgar Rice Burroughs on, for half a century, assumed a kind of primordial swampy world teeming with life, but of a kind of, damp and humid Bolivian jungle type atmosphere. That was all through that little pulpy book that I read, and that little pulpy book sent me on to other stories. I spent a good week reading about Venus. First, in science fiction of one kind or another, I reread a couple of great books, science fiction novels set on Venus that didn't count for New Worlds November because they were too long. But then, because it's also nonfiction November, I branched out to reading virtually everything I have here on Venus and a few ebooks that I got about what we now know about the planet Venus. And that is the problem. That has been the problem for me with prolepsis, is that what do you do if you're reading a science fiction story? I mean, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Carson and Venus stories were science fantasy. That was a thriving genre at the time he invented it, and they are easier to excuse. They were never meant to be real. They were always meant to be exotic, fantastic. But science fiction of a more proper, domesticated kind, the kind that was introduced by, Asimov and Clarke, it's very much vulnerable to prolepsis. It's very much vulnerable to you reading something in 1959 that if you're reading it in 1971, you know that the whole imaginative underpinning of the story is not true. You know that. The Terminator line of knowledge has left that story and stories like it in the dark. Science fiction, I guess, is always vulnerable to this, but some science fiction future-proofs itself better than others. And planetary exploration stories, especially the inner rocky planets, we know what Mars is like now. We know what Venus is like now. We know what things we can rule out. We don't know in either place, or even Mercury. We don't know in either place what surprises might still be lurking deep below the surface, a mile below Mars's surface in an aquifer, a mile below Venus's surface or in some sort of aquifer, or more likely, floating in filaments in Venus's upper atmosphere. We don't know what surprises lie in store for us along those lines, but we know what we won't find. And that rules out those stories. And as I mentioned in that Venus episode of New Worlds November, one of the only New Worlds November videos that I've made, If you rule out the science in a science fiction story, you are left with the fiction. And no offense to C.M. Kornbluth or Stanley Weintraub or Murray Leinster or Isaac Asimov himself, certainly Arthur C. Clarke. When you take the science out of science fiction, the fiction you are left with is usually awful. It's usually key-pounding deadline tripe, whose only reason for existence, the only reason why it was bought by an editor, the only reason why it was praised in the letters column by readers is because of the science speculation. Take that out, or rather have outside events render it superfluous, and you are left with, by and large, very unsatisfying fiction. The giants survive it, but I wasn't reading a whole lot of giants. At least I wasn't reading their giant work. And I enhanced that problem. I shouldn't have, but I enhanced that problem by moving on and reading more about what we know about Venus, which I know this is going to strike you as very prosaic. It's going to knock me down in your already low estimation. But I find the further study of what Venus is actually like far more interesting than the fantasies that were once spun about what it might have been like. I hang on every detail that comes from the surface of Venus, every hint of what the weather is like, or what the sunrise looks like, or what the wind sounds like. And that's true for everywhere else in the solar system as well. If you have a giant moon of some gas giant that is blasting geysers of water out into space at a regular basis, I'm fascinated by that, even though that is probably not a stranded extraterrestrial civilization venting water in order to keep its domed cities safe. That is the kind of speculation that Edgar Rice Burroughs would have done if we'd known that detail about Enceladus or wherever 100 years ago. But nobody does it now. Nobody does it now. It is largely a given now in terms of science speculation, not science fiction speculation, but science speculation. It is largely a given that there is no intelligent life anywhere else in the solar system, no technological life, at least that originated in this solar system. There are no hidden civilizations a mile under 10 miles under the surface of an ice moon. There might be life. I think there is life. But it'll be microorganisms. That's all. It won't be sentient. It won't know. It won't be creepy microorganisms that band together to be evil or anything like that. It'll be scum. I believe that will be the case for its first 13 billion years. 13 billion years is a long time. I had a marriage to Deb that lasted that long. For billions and billions of years, this solar system was entirely occupied by scum. The one planet that had it was this one. And for the first 2 billion years of life on this planet, it was single cellular, microcellular scum. And for all we know, I think it's very likely the life that might have existed in the oceans of Mars 1 billion years ago, or the oceans of Venus, which certainly had them 1 billion years ago, were also, if there was life there, and I think there probably was, seeded from space. Although organic life in scum ponds that are well aerated and have plenty of liquid water and plenty of sunlight, getting the building blocks that will eventually grow into single cellular or very basic life, scum life, is not hard to do. It's almost like a certain concatenation of chemicals arranges that way, just naturally. So I think it's likely that that kind of scum, that kind of microscopic life forms, I think it's likely that existed in the oceans of Mars and probably existed in the oceans of Venus, and then billions of years passed and biomes changed. And when those biomes were changing, they were the same on Earth. I think it's interesting to think about. I think it's possible that there was one point in this solar system's history when there was life on 3 of the rocky inner planets in the solar system: Mars, Venus, and Earth. I think that's likely. But it's not true anymore. We know that. We know that it's not true anymore. And I find that interesting, but that ruins, for me, a whole lot of science fiction stories that I once remember liking. I remember what it was like not to know a lot of what we know now. And that Maybe if I'd stuck with the actual themes for New Worlds November, that wouldn't have been such a problem. But I'm such a bad host that I didn't. I let that became a week of Venus, and I sought an antidote to that in a couple of science fiction stories where the technology involved is so advanced that to borrow from Arthur C. Clarke, it's pretty much magic. And I went specifically to those stories and those authors because I thought, oh, well, this will cure me of the problem of prolepsis. These stories are so future-proofed that there's no way at all. And that's true, but that also makes them science fantasy. That takes the element out of it. I'm starting to wonder if there isn't a relatively narrow cutting edge of science fiction that will still work in the way that all of the grand golden age science fiction did, where it's fiction mixed with scientific speculation. Can't have scientific speculation if you already know what the answer is. And that makes for a kind of a narrow wedge. And that has been on my mind in the reading that I've been doing in the last few days for the final week of New Worlds November, which is robots and AI, because we are on the Terminator of that technology. If we had been back in the 1970s, we'd have been on the Terminator of that technology, the Venera missions and the Mariner missions. We'd have been on the Terminator of that technology when it comes to knowing, finally, that Venus has no swamps. That Venus has no surging black oceans, that it has no towering canopies of trees with monsters in them. There came a time, a week, 2 weeks, a month at the outmost, that changed that. We then knew that wasn't true. And that any Venus that you set a story in that's like that is no longer science fiction. Not in the real sense, not in the golden age sense of science speculation, of speculating on what we know and extrapolating it out just enough to what it might be. That is not true for Venus. And we were on the dividing line then. We're not anymore. And so science fiction stories set in the jungles of Venus do not happen anymore. They are not written anymore. Or if they are, they're in a very twee Dave Eggers kind of intentional anachronistic manner that's intensely boring. but we're not done with those Terminators. We're on that Terminator for robots and AI. I don't know how many of those terrifying clips that you've seen of robots dancing in labs or robot dogs walking down the sidewalk. I want you to remember all of the technology, all of the groups that have made that technology, that have made robots that can dance and do somersaults over tables and all that sort of thing. All of the bodies of infrastructure that allowed that technology to happen also made those video clips. The ultimate underground fingerprint on those clips is the military-industrial complex. Which means when you see robots dancing in a lab, you are meant to say, non-threatening. When you see a little robot dog walking down the sidewalk with a Santa hat on, that is a whole room full of absolutely chalk-white, dead-eyed, soulless 30-something technocrats wondering explicitly amongst themselves, not verbally because they don't talk anymore, they just text with each other, what images they can project of this technology that will make it palatable to the normies out there who would otherwise burn down their laboratories. That's why you're seeing those clips as opposed to other clips. That's why you are. I'm amazed that a weird, choppy, somewhat grainy clip of a robot dog firing weapons, I'm amazed that reached the public. Mostly it has not been that. And also, these groups were very careful in releasing 2 or 3 years ago video clips that showed robots badly malfunctioning. Here, we're going to try to get this robot to bend over as if it were tying its shoe, and then it goes into spasms. And it's posted on Facebook or on Twitter, and all the comments in the comments field are, and this is the future we were worried about? And that's exactly the response they wanted. That's why they released that footage. That was a one in a million goof on the part of that machine. Most of the time, it does perfectly what it's told to, and the detail that doesn't surface, the detail that doesn't come out from robotics labs, and especially AI labs, the detail that doesn't come out is how often they do something they were not told to do, which is the Terminator line that I'm talking about. That is the peril of prolepsis when you're talking about robots and AI, is that you get an AI program and you make it so that it is designed, you fill it with the information it needs to translate spoken German into spoken Portuguese. Then you make another AI and you program it to translate spoken Portuguese into spoken Italian. And you run experiments on those AIs that are, keep in mind, their programs have been written. The programs have been written. This is what you can do, and this is only what you can do. Good information in, good information out. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Those are the shibboleths that we are told by the people making these monstrosities specifically to calm us down. You make an AI that can learn language A and translate it into language B. You make another AI that is not connected with the first one that can translate language B into language C. You leave it alone for a week and suddenly the second AI knows language A. Which is not possible in terms of how they were programmed. The only way it's possible is if the second AI is talking to the first AI and learning information from that AI that it was not programmed with. And the only way it can do that is if it has changed its programming. And when you talk to MIT eggheads who deal with this stuff, stories like that crop up, and they don't even stop the conversation. When they are absolute conversation stoppers. They are absolutely conversation stoppers. In the labs that are breaking this stuff down in Caltech and MIT and 4 labs in China, the labs that are at the cutting edge of this stuff, the labs that are on the Terminator line, when you get those creators drunk on wine and calzones in your living room, they will talk about sentience. And they aren't talking about their own, because they barely have it. They're talking about sentience. They will talk about sentience. They will say, it really looked to me like it was extrapolating all sorts of calculations in order to stop from being turned off. I didn't see any other reason why it would do what it's doing, except that it didn't want me to terminate its program. So I'm having a problem with prolepsis once again for the 4th and final week of New World's November, because we are on the edge of that. We are on the Terminator line. Who knows how long it will last? A decade, I would think. A decade before certain concepts have filtered all the way into public society. Of course, by then, the realities will also have filtered into public society. If you live in an urban area or even a suburban area in the United States, your police department has a larger budget than your city does. This is the point that I was trying to make a couple of years ago when that motto or that phrase was going around, defund the police. I was trying to point out that you don't have to be a tofu-munching lefty to espouse that motto. Defund the police doesn't mean there's no more police department. It means, does your police department in your town have a tank? Does it have surface-to-air missiles? Does it have military ordnance for the mowing down of large crowds of unarmed people? Does it have that? Technically, their budget is a public document. Technically, you could find out and maybe organize a protest to divert some of that money to your town's public schools or water systems instead of a police department. If you live in the United States and you live in a town of over 100,000 people, it's likely that your police department is a gigantically financially engorged institution that really, really hates your civil liberties. Really, really hates them. They don't just hate the civil liberties of those, those crooks that get a high-priced lawyer to get them off on a technicality. No, they hate your civil liberties. If you don't believe me, look at the footage during suburban riots when 100 miles away or a mile away from a riot, people in a quiet suburb street would be looking out their door, wondering what's going on, and battalions of armed police with military ordnance slung over their shoulders would be screaming at people, get in your effing doors, close the windows, don't look outside. And if they met with even a moment's resistance, they fired ordnance at people standing in their doorways. There were film footages of clips of that in a dozen different towns. It wasn't just the riots. The riots pull the mask off civil unrest and also, of course, deliberate troublemakers. They also pulled the mask off the fact that your police department is a quasi-military organization that's accountable to no one and that has a huge amount of technology at its disposal. Now, in response to that kind of dystopian thing that was filmed, you can see it. You can see that it's true. Black vans driving up on protesters, grabbing them and throwing them in the van and driving off. No side paneling, no license plate, no the driver and the guys who grabbed the protesters dressed in black from head to toe, no identifying information whatsoever. We lived through a summer of not only bootless vandalism, but also police authoritarianism. The two fed each other. And in a situation like that, you might think, well, if worse comes to worse, I can simply demand an officer's name and badge number. But we're not a full 10 years out from that offending police officer being inhuman, being a robot. Whether it's human-shaped robot or not, I don't care. It doesn't have to be dog-shaped either. It can be a totally non-analogous shape that does all the things it's supposed to do and is bomb-proof and is controlled from somewhere a mile away, so you don't have any say in the matter at all. It's not human. It doesn't have to have a badge number. It's not accessible to you saying this is against the law. My point being, we're really close to all kinds of things like that. All kinds of things like that. AIs fly planes, take them off, and land them. AIs guide and almost exclusively conduct highly detailed surgery, where you're talking with nurses when you're getting prepped for the day, and you're talking with dietitians when you're going without solid food to get ready for your operation, and you're shaking hands with the guy who calls himself the surgeon the next day, but he barely touched you. And so on and so forth. College admissions, job admissions, loan approvals, bank finance transfers, most of Wall Street that affects you down the line, military systems at the Pentagon and at Thunder Mountain and whatnot. We're living on that Terminator for this third category of robots and AI, and that presents a problem for me. It's a self-induced problem, but how can I look at a collection of short stories about robots and AI, especially anything that was written any later than 5 years ago, which rules out almost all of science fiction? Anything about robots and AI that was written 10 years ago, 20 years ago, God help us, 50 years ago, is going to seem incredibly clunky. It's going to invoke the problems of prolepsis that I had with space exploration. It's going to invoke those problems. Unless the robots and AI are so future-proofed that, they might as well be magic. They might as well be Gort from the day the Earth stood still. They might as well be, indestructible androids that know everything and can go intangible and have all kinds of ability. They might as well be characters in science fiction short stories that snap their fingers or do a finger gesture, and suddenly they've got a fully functional net-connected computer in thin air around their fingers. The narrow wedge here is going to be hard to appease. I am going to try to appease it. I'm going to continue for New Worlds November, the event that I embraced and then abandoned. And I'm going to try with this. This is the latest issue of Asimov's. I got it in the mail the other day. And at first I thought I would just do what I usually do with Asimov's, which is to take the subscription card that's inside, use it as a bookmark, and just plow straight through the issue from beginning to end. I have a few rules of thumb for Asimov's and Analog and the Magazine of Science Fiction and Fantasy that I didn't have 2 or 3 years ago. There are a few things that a story can do now in one of these that will cause me to stop reading it and skip on to the next one, not even bother with it, even though it's a waste of money to have stories in an issue that you subscribe to that you don't read. Nevertheless, if all sorts of Twitter politics are introduced in the story early on, and it's supposed to be just something that I accept, it's not even part of the science fiction of the story, even though it has no scientific basis. It's just part of being on a quote-unquote right side of history in 2021 when the story was written, or 2022 when the story was accepted and printed. I'm not interested in anything like that. I'm not interested. I shouldn't have to share an author's Twitter politics in order to read their work. And if they make that a condition, you must accept my Twitter politics in order to read my work, or you're not going to be able to make any sense out of it, then I won't read their work. That's a simple choice, right? They're obviously intentionally narrowing their audience themselves. And also, the same thing is true with the outright uh, explicit bigotries that have become so fashionable in the 21st century, and especially since 2021. I am not interested in reading a story that tells me that all white people are racist, where a character just simply says that, and it's not the focus of the story, it's not the point of the story, and it doesn't make them the bad guy. Instead, it's just, well, this is just, I mean, come on, we all know this, right? I mean, let's just move on to this knobby-headed alien. That's the real atrocity that we're talking about here. We already know what kind of a monster you are. No, no, no. I'm going to stop reading that story as well. So who knows how much of this uh, I won't read. Who knows how many stories in here I won't read. If I'm paging through a story, an issue of Asimov's or Analog, and I get to a fairly standard but could still be enjoyable story about a hardy band of space marines, for instance, that have been sent to pacify a planet, and they find out that the monsters are far more likable than they thought, and then they're presented with a moral problem. If the author goes out of their way at the beginning of a story like that to describe one of those space marines as morbidly obese, because don't you tread on me and healthy at any size and all that, I'm going to stop reading. I'm going to stop reading the story. I should not have to enter into any fantasy world of yours other than the one you're constructing. And the one you're constructing should be internally consistent. It shouldn't have anything to do with Twitter policies. It shouldn't be you prancing and pirouetting like a show dog for the approval of a tiny handful of lunatics on Twitter. So who knows how many of the stories in this thing I will dismiss without even reading them, but I'm assuming it won't be all of them. I have yet to hit an issue of Asimov's or Analog where every issue did that, where every story in the issue had a warning sign saying, I don't want you as a reader. I have yet to find an issue that did that, where every single story did that. So I will be going through this thing, much as I did with this month's Analog. I'll be going through this thing specifically for the prompt for this week. I will be skipping the stories that don't have computers and robots and AI, and I'll be concentrating on the ones that do, and seeing what kind of a job they do. It's possible, Asimov's and Analog, these square-bound pulp magazines, are usually the laboratories for prolepsis. They are usually the place where really good speculation is being done. Bad too, but really good speculation. I'm going to give that a try for this, and I will try to report back on what my chances are. And it could be that, my luck being what it is, it could be that this is the typical pejorative for what I'm talking about is SJW, which is kind of bitter because SJW stands for Social Justice Warrior, which is something we should all be. But I think the perversion that I'm talking about, the perversion of it that I'm talking about. It could be that this will be the first issue that is entirely SJW, and so entirely goes unread. I have already made a mental decision for Asimov's and Analog, for any other magazine that I get, that if I hit an issue like that, that subscription ends, as I'm not going to run the risk of wasting money by having a whole issue come to my mailbox that I'm not going to read because somebody wants me to admit that I'm the worst monster in history, worse than the knobby-headed alien in the story. Anyway, that was a long digression to say, if I find that the stories in this issue are readable and not poisoned, then I'm going to read the stories in here. I'm going to concentrate first on the stories in here that turn on robots and AI, and we'll see. We'll see what kind of results I have. The problem here is that some of the high water marks are what do me in. About 10 years ago, I read a story about a spaceship that's being hunted by another spaceship. They're both automatic. They're both automated. They're no human crew. Never has been. And the ship that's being hunted is just doing long-range mathematical computations and realizing it cannot possibly outrun its pursuer. No matter what, it does. But it comes to that conclusion very gradually. But it's not a human reluctance. It's a machine reluctance. And I think it was called The Long Chase. Boy, was it good, though. And I think I told you about, I read a couple of years ago, a story about a little children's toy that had a primitive AI in it that is on board a plane that has massive malfunction. The humans are incapacitated, and the little help me toy it is programmed to protect and help. It views that programming in terms of protecting all of these helpless humans on board this ailing craft, and it works to form primitive AI communities with the other automated systems on board the aircraft. The navigation, the automation inside the drinks cart, the automation inside the chairs, in order to patch together enough of a community to help this catastrophe, to avert this catastrophe. I forget the name of that story. I have it, but it was amazing. It was amazingly good. And those types of things would be perfect. If I could find one of those in here for the fourth week of New Worlds November, that would be great. But I will have to see. I'm not sure that I will. I will try to remember to report back. Anyway, that's my field report on New Worlds November as it wraps up. Is that the problems with prolepsis? That is the problem that I'm encountering here. Is the moment, or the exact long moment, when scientific speculation in science fiction becomes obsolete. When the world around you is making you so impatient with the plotting projections in the story that you're reading that all you're doing is tapping your foot in irritation. You're not enjoying the story at all. It's not a problem that I anticipated for New Worlds November. I'm going to hope that I have smooth sailing for the rest of the month. But anyway, this has gone on long enough. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.